For many of you, the question today, okay, for many people, the question today is, what were you doing 19 years ago? And if you're old enough, that's a question that you have been asked, or you may be asking other people. Hey, this is Roy Seals with Global Faith Mission Agency, and I'm talking today with Jennifer Wells. And 19 years ago on this day, we were concluding a medical mission trip, getting ready to come back to the United States of America when suddenly all of our plans were changed. Jennifer, you were on this trip. Now, this was your first mission trip.
Correct.
Okay, and so you how did the trip go up until that point for you?
Well, it was my first trip, and the reason I got involved in this trip was because of you, Roy. Roy was my patient at the dental office I worked for, and he would ask the doctor that we worked for to go on trips, and I finally said, "You never have asked me," and I thought that I would love to do that. And so, yes, this was my first trip, and it took a lot of preparation, and we flew two different planes?
Three. We had three
different
planes that took us into the jungle.
Yeah, and the last one was a three-seater that flew over the side of a cliff. The wing went over the side of the cliff to turn around to land us. Needless to say, I thought, what have I done? But it was great.
We were in the country of Venezuela, out in the jungle, and we had flown into the village of Chahuranya. There was a missionary that was working there that I worked with very closely, and there was a need for a medical team to come in. So we took a team of doctors, nurses, and a dentist and a dental hygienist, which is Jennifer, and had a very successful ministry trip. And we'll talk about that maybe on some other time, about what was accomplished and what we did. But everything went well until the very last day. We were organized, we had everything structured, and it went just as we wanted it to be. We had flown in on the MAF planes. MAF stands for Mission Aviation Fellowship, and they had 3 planes in the country of Venezuela. It took all 3 of their planes for us to get our team and our gear and equipment into Chahuranya, the jungle. On the day we were to leave, September the 11th, we were waiting for our planes to fly in from civilization, pick us up, and fly us all back. And then we would catch our next flight to Caracas, Venezuela, and then back to the United States. Well, everything changed that day. And as the first plane landed in that grass strip in the little village of Chahuranya, a village of less than 500 Indians who inhabited that place, the pilot and I talked after he got out of the plane. He received a call on his radio, answered the call, and he was told at that time that we would not, us, the team, would not be able to return to the United States that day. There was an emergency. He didn't know what was going on, and I don't know if you remember, at that point, the pilot went with us back to the hut where the missionary lived, and we all got together so he could tell us that a disaster had occurred here in the United States of America. And at that moment, then, we had a prayer meeting. But this was your first mission trip, your first international trip. Do you remember what you felt like at that moment as we were getting ready to come back and how our plans were changed?
I remember being so ready to come back. So I loved what I had done, but I missed I had a 3rd grader and a 6th grader, and leaving them was pretty traumatic. There was lots of tears when I left, and so I couldn't wait to see them. My daughter was so structured in everything that I had to write out every day what she would wear, who would pick her up, and the days ran out. And I just remember at that moment thinking of her and thinking, how is she going to handle this at 8 years old, that to be explained to her, that her mother is not going to be coming home when she thinks. And but I also remember you kidding us and saying every day in that jungle, we're going to the Dairy Queen after this and get an ice cream. And so when we first got told about the building, something happened to a building, I first thought you were kidding. And then I can remember just the tears just coming over me when we were praying, realizing this was something very tragic.
We did not know at that moment the extent of the attack and what all had happened. Eventually, all 3 planes arrived in Chahuranya, and we got all of our gear that we were bringing back to the States on the plane, all the medical team, and we got on the planes, flew back. When we landed at the airport there at the edge of the jungle in civilization where MAF was based, I remember one of the men that worked in the hangar knew all the MAF personnel, came out to meet us, and he said, "I am so sorry for what happened in your country today." And in a demonstration of solidarity, he said, "We're with you, brother. We are with you." At that moment, we went to one of the homes of the MAF people, and there was a small TV. They had a real TV, small TV. There was all of our team. All the MAF families had gathered at that house, and all their children. So there were close to 40 people in this one small living room of a missionary. And we watched the news, the international news, and saw what had happened. So when we saw the news that night and saw the extent of the damage and the attack and what it meant, what did you feel then?
I just felt so sad for our country. And I felt like that even where we were, we really weren't in the thick of it as they were. And I remember the same thing. I remember walking down the street and seeing a lady and her saying, "I'm praying for your country." And we thought we were doing such a great thing, and all of a sudden the wheels turned and people were praying for us. And I just remember thinking, we may not be able to go home for a while, and this is not about me. I had to tell myself that a lot. This is not about me, because you take it very personal at that moment when you think you've did something wonderful for the Lord, but you had to. And Roy was amazing. We had a devotion every morning. We would gather at one of the homes, and Roy would help us to realize that this is nothing compared to what Paul went through, and he was beaten and stoned and imprisoned, and we're just inconvenienced for a while.
When we arrived at the MAF center, and the missionaries, all of a sudden, and none of this was planned, of course, nobody knew an event of this nature was going to take place. We needed a place to stay. There were no plans for us to stay in this town. They had very little resources to accommodate people like us. So the MAF people split us up amongst their group. And so how did that impact you? The fact these people we didn't even know took us in.
That impacted me tremendously. I think I was in my 30s, and in your 30s, you think, when you see someone, you prejudge, and you think, I don't think we could have we'll ever be friends, and I don't know why you think that, but as you get older, you don't think that at all. But at that moment, I remember thinking, these people don't know us from Adam, and they are inviting us into their homes. They are feeding us. They are praying with us. They are offering us a fresh bed, even some of their clothes, because we left all of our clothes there. You remember that? We left all of our clothes for the people in the jungle. And so it really made me think of us as Americans, how, everyone has to have their own home. Even grandparents don't live with their children and their grandchildren, and how we need to be more open to other believers and to help just those in need. And it was just such a witness to me.
Well, we ended up being there for 5 days. And these people that didn't know us opened up their homes, and we split up our group. A part of our group left. We had 2 other men on the medical team, and they left to go back to Caracas thinking they would be able to get back to the United States earlier. Of course, they were not able to do that. And so the international flights were not able to get back to the United States. And so we were there 5 days, and our plans changed. And what I had was a doctor, 2 nurses, a dentist, dental hygienist, people that work in the medical profession, and to an extent, a lot of medical personnel are in charge in their world. In their doctor's office, in their hospital, in their complex, they're in charge. All of a sudden, nobody was in charge. And that impressed me, you know. So finally, two of our team left, the two men left, and so that left the rest of the group there. And for the next 5 days, we just went day by day, not knowing when we could come back.
Correct.
Were you able to come and communicate with your family?
Yes, I was able to use their phone, and that was amazing. And I even called my best friend that was helping with my children just to let her know that I was okay. I think it helps to hear your voice and just to know you're okay. But yeah, that was wonderful. But I do remember you saying every night, just pack your bags in the morning, we'll go to the hotel, and we'll see. And just the feeling of, oh, you know, not today, not today, not today. I remember the last night before we came home, I prayed that I had a dream that a war broke out and that, you know, President Bush was saying no more travel. And I guess you just, in your mind, you kind of are like worn out from thinking, you know, what's the worst case scenario? And you just have to remember that God is in control, and God was in control. And we got back, and we were fine.
We did. Every day we would go to this very small travel agency that was there in this small town, and every day we were told, no flights today, no flights today. And they got to know us, and they recognized us when we'd walk in. And finally the day came when they said, yes, you can get on a plane and go back. We came back to the airport in Caracas, and it was a madhouse because now you had a backlog of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of international travelers that were in the same boat we were in. They couldn't travel. Now everybody wanted to come back to the States. Do you remember the chaotic scene there in the Venezuela airport?
I remember the panic in everybody's face. It reminds me of today. It reminds me of going to the grocery store for the first time with a mask on and just seeing the look of fear in everyone's face. That was the look that they had, you know, then.
Well, we were able to catch a flight back to the United States. Everybody wanted to travel, and yet a very interesting phenomenon occurred. Everybody, the lines to get on the plane were big, but at the last minute, a lot of people actually became afraid of flying on that day. What if another attack occurs? So our plane was not full. If you remember, the flight from Caracas to Miami was not a full flight. We were able to get on. Then we got to Miami, and I've been in and out of the Miami airport I don't know how many times in my life because of all my frequent travels to Latin America. It's the gateway to the Americas. It was the most chaotic scene I'd ever seen in my life. And so we had to spend one night in Miami. Then the next day we got up at 4 o'clock in the morning. We all left our hotel to go to the airport. And in your mind, what did you see when we drove up to the airport in Miami? What was it like?
I didn't think we would ever get home. I thought we needed to rent a car.
Well, it was an incredible sight because once again you had thousands of passengers needing to return to their destination. And if you've ever been to the Miami airport, it's a U-shaped airport with all these terminals in there, but it's that U-shape. I knew where American Airlines operated out of, and because that's one of their main hubs, the line was impossibly long. It went all the way outside. It was all over the sidewalks outside. And I remember early that morning, as we got into our line with American Airlines, that's who we had flown with, thinking, we're not going to make it. We're not going to make it. So once again, how did you feel on that day?
I knew I wasn't going to go home that day. I knew it was going to be a while.
Well, the one thing that did happen, I remembered that Miami was the hub for American, and Delta flies in, of course, to Miami, but it's not their hub. So and then by now there were just 3 of us. So it was you and Deidre and myself. And so I left you and Deidre in line at American, and I ran down to the other end of the airport and found Delta. I said, do you have a flight going to Atlanta? And they said, we have a flight leaving in less than half an hour. Do you have room? They said, we have plenty of room. I ran all the way back, got these ladies, and we all ran as fast as we could with our luggage, and finally got on the plane and came back. And met your families later that day.
Yes.
19 years later, our country is in a different situation. It's in a different emergency, you could say. But there are lessons that we learned back then, Jennifer, that can be applied today. What would be your advice to somebody today that's unsettled, fearful, concerned? Lessons maybe you learned 19 years ago that you think are applicable today?
I learned that as a believer, you have to really know where your faith is and what it is, because you can say you have faith, you can be born in a Christian home, and you can be raised by Christian parents, but until you go through something hard and you use your faith, you have to have faith. You have to have hope. And I feel like that through that trip, Christ showed me that he was going to take care of me. He did not bring me that far for such a time as us to lose our lives. And I think you can't quit living either, you know, like, and for me, when we came back, I'll never forget this. My coworkers were so excited to have me back that they had streamers on my door at work, and they couldn't wait to get to lunch. And for me, not being in the heart of everything, I couldn't wait to tell the story of the trip. I still had so much excitement, even though it was such a sad time here. And I'll never forget, we went to a Long John Silver's, and there was a little lady sitting across from us. And I was telling my story, and I do like to smile. That's just me. I just feel like that there was so many great things that happened. And the lady walked over to us finally, and she said, "Ma'am," she said, "I've been watching you this whole time, and you've never stopped smiling. This world needs more of that. They need your smile. Don't stop." And I feel like that right now, that even with a mask, they can see us smiling. And they, you know, don't give up with your faith. God has got you where he wants you to be. And we are here for such a time as this.
One of the things we all learned back then, we all knew, and we were all believers, the entire medical team, I think we were believers, but you know that God's in control, but when you go through something like that, then you experience the fact that you're not in control and God's in control. And I think 19 years later, our country's in a different situation today, but there are a lot of issues, a lot of problems in this country, and our exhortation is for you to trust in the Lord during these days. We focused on what we experienced at the end of the trip and the fact that we couldn't get back. But Jennifer, I want to talk with you later in a separate interview and talk about that medical mission trip, what was accomplished and what we did. Now, I'll end our talk today with this. When we got back, that was your first mission trip. My concern for Jennifer was, you'll never go back on another mission trip. And that was one of the concerns I had because of what we had lived at the end, not because of what we experienced on the mission trip, the medical trip. That was a success. Mm-hmm. It was those last 5 days that was different.
Yes.
So have you been back on another mission trip?
I have been back on, I think I've been back on 6 out of the country, and did a couple here. And that little girl that I told you about, she had so much fear after I got back that every day when I would take her to school, I would look in the rearview mirror and see her chin quiver. And every day the school nurse would have to call, and she would have to just listen to my voice and make sure I was back. And when I went back to Venezuela 2 years later, she told me the week before, she said, "Mom, I know it's Satan that's given me this fear, and I am telling him to get behind me." And she was just in 5th grade, and I thought, if I had not gone back, what would that have taught her? That would have taught her to give in to fear. And we don't need to give in to our fears when God is on our side. And so much has came from the other medical trips, and I thank you, Roy, for believing in me and just thinking that it was okay to take a dental hygienist. I didn't know what I was doing, but it worked out great, and I just feel like, you know, if you had not have listened to a lady over you with her hands in her mouth, then I would have never gotten to experience all the wonderful things I've got to experience.
It's amazing how God brings us together, our connections. Jennifer was my dental hygienist, and it was through that platform that she was introduced to medical mission trips, and what a blessing that's been. Well, we'll come back and talk at another time about the mission trips, and we would like to see you involved, and how can God use you in this way. Jennifer, thank you for being with us today, and to those who are viewing during this time, do not lose your faith in God. Trust the Lord. He's in control. God bless you.